Welcome everyone to this ISEE North American Chapter webinar focused on Behind the Academic Curtain. So we're really lucky to be joined by BEATE RITZ and Brian Schwartz today to talk about all the things we don't spend enough time discussing while we're trying to survive in academia. And so with that, I'll let Mary Anthi introduce Dr. Ritz.
Yes, we are very happy to have Dr. Ritz join us today. We wanted to have, for today's workshop, someone from a public university and someone from a private university for this discussion. Dr. Ritz is a professor at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health in the Department of Epidemiology with a joint appointment in Environmental Health Sciences, and she's the former president of ISEE as well. And we are very, very happy that she agreed to join us today.
Thank you, Marianne.
Then we are also joined by Dr. Brian Schwartz, who is a professor of environmental health and engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Schwartz is an MD who's focused on occupational medicine and does a lot of work using electronic health records and other data sources recently around sustainability and health. So we are very excited to have him here representing the more private universities. So with that, let me check our poll just to confirm. Okay, we're 50-50. So maybe the plan here is for the last 20 minutes, we'll stop recording. So if there are any questions you don't want, everyone to be able to access via YouTube, we can ask them at that point. Otherwise, the first 40 minutes we'll plan to record so that everyone can benefit from the discussion that we have today. So I'm going to launch just one more poll for us. Actually, two quick polls to kind of center us as we begin this discussion. So first, just your career stage. So Brian and BEATE have a sense of who they'll be talking to. Postdoc, assistant professor, and a couple other is the answer. And then let's do one more poll, which is kind of your main concern. Why did you join us today? So mostly we're concerned about getting grants, which will help you with all the other things on here. So, okay. So I think that's really helpful for Brian and BEATE. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started. So I think the first thing to discuss, since we do want to kind of get into a bit the difference between public and private, and maybe we can focus differences as it relates to grants, since that seems to be the major interest of folks here today. So BEATE, I don't know if you want to start and talk a little bit about just how UCLA works, how more generally public universities work around being a faculty member there.
Right, so I've been a faculty member and a student at UCLA, so I got my PhD there as well. I knew it from that end, and I did my first big research project with my then advisor. That was my dissertation. And out of that, of course, I had a lot of data. And when I became a junior faculty, one of the things you are being told is you have to become independent from your advisor, because otherwise you will not get tenure. And after 4 years, they already evaluate you in terms of, at UCLA, you have 7 years to get there. And after 4 years, they evaluate what your ability is to get research funding on your own and whether you're starting to look independent from your advisor. This is not that easy, because when you are writing grants, you have to, if you're writing small grants, then you can be creative, like RO3s. You need just data sources, and you could look for data sources outside of your primary mentor's realm. Or if you write an R21, you can develop new tools, apply new tools, so that's okay. But if you are trying to get an R01, we all know you need preliminary data, and you need to convince the reviewers that you really can do the work. And that is hard at a junior stage. I made all the mistakes in the beginning trying to go for R01s that I was not qualified for. I mean, I was qualified, I thought, because I could do the work, but nobody believed me. So that is something nobody advised me on, don't go for these RFAs for subject matter I knew I could handle and I would be able to generate data for, but nobody has seen you do it. That means you have to actually go back to what you already know, and what you know is what came out of your program with your mentor. And then it is really the tricky part to carve out your area of expertise that you want to develop in the future and become independent while you're still building onto that resource. And that's the really tricky part. And I would recommend that if that's hard for you to do, to sit down with your mentorship team, hopefully, or your mentor, and really decide on what that could be. I've just done that with a K awardee of mine who has been my student for almost 8 years through, the whole program and then postdoc. And she's now an assistant professor at UCLA. And we, in neurology, even though she does environmental health, so not my department, but it was really important for her to take part of my resources, but reformulate the questions that she's going to be asking and make them really her own. And then she went for foundation grants. And that's, by the way, a really good idea too, not to just think of NIH, just think of, the federal granting agencies, but think about smaller foundations that might like an idea that's not all in the mainstream yet, or to even go to state funding. In California, we have also state funding sources. And really important for you as junior faculty, look within your institution for small grants that they might be giving. So if you're, for example, part of a center grant, they have pilot grants, go for them every year because everything helps that you can, every penny you can garner, and every time you can say, I was the PI of this pilot grant, that already counts. But it also helps you generate the pilot money that you need for the larger grants. Look around not only in your department and in your school, but on campus or even within, on other campuses, whether they're in your city, whether there are any opportunities for these kind of research funding sources, and then start to build. And of course, a lot of institutions want you to get K awards. Why is that? Well, because there is really only a small number of FTE type jobs that are, regularly funded from the university or the state. I have one of those state funded positions. They're very rare and hard to come by. And even, and that's Brian who's going to tell you, even if you're at a private university, they will never pay 100% of your salary. At public universities, they pay between 9 and 12 months of your salary. I get 9 months for teaching, but then you are on the hook for teaching. And, your research has to be carved out on the side, apart from all the teaching you have to do. Brian.
Thank you, Beata. Okay, Brian, do you want to take the torch to the private universities? Thanks.
Okay, so if you come to Johns Hopkins as an assistant professor, they'll give you a 3-year package usually, where, if you get 100% of your salary for those first 3 years, that's okay. But by your 4th year, you're expected to bring in an increasing proportion of your salary. And then at steady state, as assistant professor, you're probably being asked to bring in 85 to 90% of your salary. You get a maximum of 6 years at assistant professor at Hopkins, and then you can be promoted to associate professor. You get a maximum of 3 3-year contracts at associate professor, and then you can be promoted to professor. Now, successful faculty at Hopkins don't take the full 6 + 9, 15 years. They take 10 to 11 years to go to professor, and you get tenure at professor. Assistant professors, 90% of their salary they have to bring in. Associate professors, you're asked to do an increasing amount of teaching and service and administrative work. And so, 80% of your salary maybe. And then at professor, depending on what kinds of leadership positions you take, you're still bringing in 75% of your salary. So what I say at Hopkins is that academic hurdles end when you're promoted to professor with tenure, that you only get tenure at professor, but the financial hurdles never end, and you always have to bring in your salary. And as opposed to what Dr. Ritz said, I think that the job at Hopkins is the best job in the universe, right? Because if you're successful, nobody asks you to teach. It's self-directed, it's autonomous, it's creative, it's innovative, great students, great faculty, and there's none of the big fish in a small pond kind of setting. There's loads of collaborators who are highly collaborative. And I kind of feel like to be most successful in a soft money environment, collaborations are key. And Hopkins and maybe 10 other schools of public health are of the size and with the collaborative spirit that Hopkins has. So it's very, very different from a public sector job.
Well, I would disagree a little bit. It's not a public sector job I have. And I love my teaching. And I have to say, teaching I use as a recruitment tool for the best people in my lab. And also, I'm honing my own skills while I'm teaching. And it's actually really, really important that you think about teaching as a continuous tool for yourself to improve your presentation skills and to also learn the next and the newest. But for that, you have to not teach service classes. Service classes should really be, something that comes later in your life. You should be teaching maybe very small specialty classes where you can really reach out to the people that you need on your team, or where you educate the people who are going to be on your team. And also where you are challenged to actually go to the next level, and by teaching, really, learn those new tools that you otherwise would not even try out. So I see teaching very positive, and I'm glad I'm 9 months paid just for teaching. But it's only 4 units a week. So it's not like I'm teaching all week, right? I teach 4 hours. Of course, I have to prepare those 4 hours, and I want to do them well. But apart from that, I'm really a research machine. Everything I do is research. It doesn't mean that you're at a public university and you're not going to get to do research. No, at a public university like UCLA, that's a research university, you have to do it. And of course, you also need collaborators. And that is actually something, when I hired on at UCLA, one of the colleagues who tried to convince me that it was a good job said, no matter where you go, this is a big university, you'll find somebody who knows a lot about what you need. And you have them on campus. You don't have to go, and then it's the UC system on top of it. You go to the next UC if you don't find it on your own campus. And I really enjoy those kind of collaborative structures that we have in California. Might be very different at a smaller public university, but this big public university system works very collaborative in that way.
Thanks, Beata. Yeah, important to talk to people who you want to emulate at the type of university you go to, because different ways to handle this. Okay, so at the beginning, a lot of people said they were interested in research grants. So also, we have one quick question. Is service, Yoshir, what does this mean? Is service class seminar?
No.
Oh, yeah, because I think I think Dr. Ritz said that something about the teaching classes to benefit you and not service classes. So I was trying to figure out what that meant, and I was trying to see if that was meant as a seminar.
No, seminars are actually great. You want to do seminars. I'm currently in charge of the doctoral seminar in our department, and it's a great environment because I have the smartest students in the department presenting their research, and we're solving problems together. So seminars are great. What is really draining your energy is when you have to teach undergraduates, and lots of EPI programs, and I don't know about environmental health so much, but EPI programs are now instituting undergraduate minors. And those are the classes to avoid in your early career, because you're basically teaching basic level epidemiology or environmental health to hundreds of undergrads who will not do research with you. And, you know, and who want you to write letters and to send you emails. And so your whole week is going to be eaten up by this kind of class. It's very different when you have a seminar. That's great. And when you teach your own environmental epi class, great.
Perfect. Okay, let's shift and talk about what was described as the secret sauce of success in our pre-meeting about this, and that is research grants. So Brian, I'm wondering if you can start off this one talking about grants, and some of the things we thought we'd hit on are, what part of writing grants does the university do for you? What are you responsible for thinking about? And if you can fit in a conversation about direct and indirect costs in there, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so since we have to bring in so much of our salary at a private university like Hopkins, I generally focus on larger grants. If you need to get pilot data before you'll be competitive for that larger grant, you can apply for some of those internal grants, but I generally, you can't get your salary support from those internal grants. So in my career, I generally did not spend a lot of time on those. I think the key for research grant success is to get a group of highly critical collaborators. You don't want people to read your grants and say, very good job. You want it to come back really torn to pieces. And you want to have a group of collaborators who you can go to the whiteboard with and really hash around ideas. I've always thought that sort of creative argumentation is the way you get your grant good. Now, the science has to be done by you. Then there's a whole bunch of other documents that go in for an NIH grant. So I encourage you all to get the SF 424 if you've never read it before. It's a really huge PDF about all the different components of an NIH grant, just to see all the different ones. And then meet with your administrative people in your department to figure out what services they will provide to you. Some departments at the School of Public Health, the department keeps the Biosketch, the department keeps the other support, the department keeps a whole set of budget justifications, and your analyst will often write it for you, and then you can just edit it. So find out what services are offered. I mean, in general, there is the other extreme where the department might keep examples of all those other documents, but they don't do them for you. So at a minimum, you can get copies of those. But just note that that those change over time, and make sure you don't have a 5-year-old grant as your example. Get the most recent stuff. The other thing to just to make you aware of, I don't know if you guys know about the Science CV service on what's it called, NCHS. So you can get your Biosketch printed through there, and the PMC IDs and the PM IDs will automatically come. Now, when you write a grant to NIH, you only have to worry about the direct costs. NIH will pay indirect costs that are negotiated by university on top of that. So 60, 65, 70% in addition. In addition, for the salaries, there's a fringe rate. And so you're paying your salary plus a fringe plus the IDC. Now, the thing to know about this, there are some funders who, when they put out an RFA for $300,000, that includes the IDC. And so you have to really be clear about what kind of grant you're applying for, because you might be asked, you might see an RFA for 300 grand, in which case you got 300 grand of direct costs, but no, that includes the indirect costs. So it's very important. The indirect costs go to the university. Some universities give some of that money back to departments. Some departments give some of that money back to faculty to incentivize them. Find out about that, but in general, it's highly variable from department to department and school to school.
Thanks, Brian. Beate, do you have things to add from your perspective?
Yeah, so the other support page is now automated on our campus as well. The Biosketch is really a problem, and I think that's an NIH made problem, that you have to actually make up a Biosketch for every thematic area that you are applying for, and you have to tell the reviewers why you and your team in that personal statement are the best to do this research. And then you have to underlay that with everything you've already done that proves that you are the expert. And for me, with 300-400 papers and 5 areas of interest, that means I have a lot of editing, and every time I write a grant, it's a nightmare, and no administrator can do it for you. So be careful about that, because there's not one Biosketch anymore. That's when I started. That was really nice. There are also these other pages that you have to pay attention to, because you need them in order for your application to be complete. And those are pages that you also can get from your administrators. They are about the research facilities at your school, the research facilities in your department, the kind of space you have, the kind of tools you have, access to cluster computing, access to core facilities. All of that needs to go somewhere in your grant application on these form pages about facilities. Don't forget them. What I usually do with the SF, whatever the number is, I always forget. There is one page with an overview where you have the listing of everything you need. And then I go through that page and make sure that I have all of the form pages. What often takes the longest is get the CVs of your collaborators. If you get an administrator to help you with that, to collect everyone's CV, that's already half the win. The other thing that you have to be aware of, if you cannot find certain services at your own university, and you have to, for example, go for some mass spec or some special kind of arrangement with a lab outside of your university, or you have a collaborator at a different university, then you have to set up something called a subcontract. And that subcontracting is between your university and the other university, and it's almost like a mini NIH grant, and they take at least a week or two. Start that early. The worst thing that can happen is you have everything else ready, but that subcontract hasn't been signed, so your grant can't go out this round because of that. Those are the little snags you definitely want to avoid. And as much as you can look at other people's grants and try to figure out how you build your grant, that's all good. You have to kind of do this every time you write a grant, of course, thematically for what you are trying to convince people is interesting, is worth doing, is a gap, but also something very exciting. So all of that you have to do. And the best way of seeing whether you actually hit the point is find somebody not in your area and have them read it and come back with questions. Because you will have a lot of reviewers who know something about your grant really well, but other things they won't really know. So writing the grant at the right level that an intelligent academic can read it, who is not completely involved in every aspect of your work, that is really important. So find people outside of your field, maybe people you studied with who do something else now, and have them read through and ask questions.
Thanks, Beata. So how are you deciding where to send grants and whether you respond to specific RFAs or you just submit kind of what you've decided? Are you, and most of us focus on NIEHS, but do you make decisions to try to go to other institutes at times? How do you think about these things? Beata, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so NIH is great for many, and NIEHS is great for many reasons. But the biggest mistake I made in the very beginning is to go for RFAs and not be at the level where, oh, this RFA was really made for me. it was like, oh, this RFA sounds interesting. I can do it. I know where there's data resources that I can, dredge up, and I want to do this. You have to be, when an RFA comes out, you have to know that there are quite a few people who have worked in this area for a very long time who will go for it, and that there are limited grants to be given, and you have to kind of gauge how high on the ranking you would be with your grant compared to everybody else who might already work in this area. If you don't know that, ask your mentor or find somebody who can help you rank this for you. Maybe you are just the right person to do this, but I have to say, I wrote like 10 grants for RFAs that, I had really no chance to get, and I wish somebody would have told me, and I wouldn't have wasted my time doing it. That said, the independent investigator initiated grants also have to be built up in the way that I described before. You have to probably start with a smaller grant, with a maybe institutional grant to collect the pilot data, and slowly but surely build them up. Best if you can do it with a K award, because that also gives you, as a junior investigator, leeway in terms of time. It gives you a temporal timeline. And it gives you 5 years where you don't have to worry about bringing in your salary every single year. But there are, in certain fields, good foundations to go after. There's HEI, if you're interested in air pollution research, there's EPA, there are some state agencies that pay for air pollution research. California Air Resource Board has given me grants. And then there are disease-specific foundations. And, if you have an interest in a certain disease where there are foundations, definitely look at them, because they can be extremely helpful in many, many ways. So I've done a lot of Parkinson's research. There are a number of Parkinson's foundations. However, they are sometimes very fickle, and you need to also figure out what they really want. Is it what you can offer really what they want? Because you can also waste a lot of time trying to get it right, and then they end up still wanting treatment options and not basic epi research. And for that, you have to actually talk to people who have applied to these foundations, look at their portfolio to make sure that they would even consider something like what you have in mind, and then decide from there.
Brian, do you have anything to add to the question about how you decide which grants to apply for, where you decide to send them, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so in general, you have to convince the reviewers that you know about the area for which you just applied for maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. So early in your career, you can generally only write grants as a PI on the stuff that you've already published on. And so, and that usually early in your career means the stuff that you did during your dissertation research or during your postdoc. During my career, you don't really send grants to a specific institute. Grants go to study sections, and then the study sections score them, and then institutes decide how to fund them. So there's ways you can try to direct your grants to various places, but in general, I never tried to direct my grants to the NIEHS, because although I did lots of environmental epidemiology, they don't have a lot of money. So I got a lot of money over the years from the Institute on Aging, from NHLBI, from NIAID, and it's all environmental and occupational health, but those institutes, some of them are 4 or 5 times larger than NIEHS. The other thing that I encourage you who are at private universities to really constantly think about is diversifying your revenue stream. So at the time where you're writing some of your grants as a PI, go on to other people's grants as a co-investigator. Get a little bit of 5% and 10% here and there so you can start adding it up. You can start getting publications in other areas, and then you can start writing grants in those other areas. I encourage epidemiology faculty to be brave and don't work on one thing. Work on, apply your tools and methods to everything. So over the years, I spent a lot of time on the epidemiology of Lyme disease and the epidemiology of obesity and the epidemiology of lead exposure and the epidemiology of cognitive function. And so lots of different exposures and exposure methods, lots of different outcomes and outcome methods. And so you can send your grants all over the place. So I encourage you to always think about diversifying your revenue streams. In general, private universities don't care too much where you get your money from, but the advantage of getting your money from NIH is that it's an independent metric of excellence. And so it really is helpful for promotion. You can put the check in the box for your salary supported, but then you can, when you go up for promotion, they can see, you know, if you can compete in the competitive process at NIH and get grants, then that is an independent metric of independence and excellence. And so that's the advantage of NIH grants.
Josiah?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just wondering if either of you have any tips or advice about where you find out about grants, both NIH. I mean, I know you can sign up for the emails from the institutes, but both at NIH, but also we're talking about grant or foundation grants.
Yeah, so of course you can sign up, as you said, you know, there are certain websites you can sign up. But hopefully your school or your institution also looks through all sorts of grant agencies, portfolios, and what comes out. And then they sometimes consolidate it and you get emails. Every week I get an email from our research administration office at the School of Public Health on grants in public health that are available, and it includes NIH and foundations and state grants. You have to get on that email list. So find out where it is. You know, somebody might be doing it. And if you have co-appointments in one or two, in more than one department, then make sure you get on both. Otherwise, you have to actually look at certain areas where there are foundations, or ask colleagues who have more experience and ask them, what is the foundation on whom's distribution list I should get? Who is funding in this area? And, you know, for example, for me in Parkinson's, clearly the Michael J. Fox Foundation is, you know, one that I need to get on. And otherwise, yeah, it's the NIH distribution list. That's all you can say.
It's very close to, oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we said 40 minutes recorded, so we're almost at 40 minutes. So I don't know if people have questions that they want to ask or not recorded, so we can stop recording after, I guess, Brian's response.
The only thing I was going to say to add to what Beata said is that I encourage you all to always be thinking about an unsolicited R01. Try to develop your own ideas, and persistence overcomes resistance. You haven't failed at a grant until you've tried 2 or 3 times. And it's hard, you know, it's a little bit tough for the study section. They've just had 2 or 3 reviewers review. You've gotten all the comments back, you respond to all the comments, and it becomes increasingly difficult for them to keep saying no. So persistence overcomes resistance, and try. At the same time, keep your eyes open. The advantage of RFAs is that it's one of the few grants you can get on the first try. You never get an unsolicited R grant on the first try. I mean, it's almost impossible. You can get an RFA grant on the first try. The disadvantage of an RFA is that they're incredibly competitive. They might fund 4 or 5, it depends, they'll tell you, and they might get 100 applications. And so in some ways, the funding line overall is lower for RFAs because they're so competitive. Now, it's not always wasted effort if you don't get it, because you can turn it into an unsolicited R01. The problem is that if they've just had a program announcement or an RFA and they funded 5 or 6 grants, you know, if you didn't get it, you're not likely to get it unless you tweak it a little bit if it goes in unsolicited. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I would even go a little step further and say, don't go for an RFA unless you already wrote an independent grant in that area. And you can just tweak your independent grant enough to fit the RFA. Because you, as a junior at least, you have your chances are not very high to get the RFA. But if you write your independent grants and then all of a sudden an RFA comes up that is 80 or 90% what you want to do, go for it because you're ready to do it. And then it's also not a waste of your time, even if you have to tweak it 30%, because then you might add new ideas that if you don't get the RFA, you can use in other ways.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to stop. I was going to stop recording. So thank you to our web viewers.